So, Scott, please come up in 1 second. This is a presentation from our partner at InSource Solutions. And Scott Miller is the Executive Vice President of Professional and Managed Services. He will be discussing operational change management. On a personal level, Scott has just last year hiked from the top of the Grand Canyon down to the bottom and back up again. So he's been there and back. And so let's please welcome Scott to the stage.
Fine. There we go. Yeah, don't get me started on the Grand Canyon or all things astrophotography. My wife and I do funny things like going out in the middle of the night and taking pictures of the galaxy. So really cool stuff. I'll talk to you about that later. I want to start a little bit by acknowledging great presentations, lots of references you're going to see. I almost feel like I need to do some citations based on presentations that have already been made. That being said, a lot of what you're going to hear and see, you might interpret this as like a wet blanket. I'm going back. I'm taking you back years and years, if you will. I'd really like you to interpret it the other way around, though. It's really intended to be fuel to the fire. It's recognizing the fact that we've got to look at things differently organizationally to be able to take advantage of these amazing things that we're seeing. Mike's statement there about it's not science fiction is true. It's out there. It's available. It's what do we have to do to be able to take advantage of it? So on with it. Factory of the future. We've heard about this a couple different times. People have referred to it a couple different times. Anybody have any idea when the first factory of the future, lights out factories were being talked about? One I remember in particular is back in 1982. Roger Smith at General Motors did a partnership with Fanuc Robotics, and they said in 82, hey, by 1990, we're going to have a lights out factory. No people inside of it. We're actually going to be able to automate this thing as we're going forward. Well, 1990 rolled around and they hadn't made it. They didn't get there. It was not possible. Lots of really cool things were done. Lots of advances have been made in automation. I spent a lot of my years in automation and technology and deployment in these plants. That's my background. And we got a long way, but the reality is they're not fully automated. There's still human beings as part of the process. There's still human beings in the process, not just in the process of making things, but as we're seeing, more along the lines of making decisions going forward. My background, I started in Durable, in General Motors, 40 years ago this summer. Actually, I was a mechanical engineering student, was a co-op, spent about 6 years working there, working my way through college, if you will. Absolutely thrilled because I got to work on robotic systems and vision systems and SPC, and no, that's not me, but I did have hair back then. Durable was a very large site. It started with raw steel and it produced a car every 54 seconds. Absolutely amazing. I was absolutely in heaven. One of my stints was 6 months as a production supervisor on the floor. Had 21 folks that I worked with. They were shooting 8 screws a day, same 8 screws over and over again. It was a great job. And I had some really cool tools back then, an IBM PCAT. Had a lot of technology available to me, a lot of stuff that I felt like I can go change the world and show these guys different ways of doing things. But they wouldn't listen to me. They had their way of getting things done. Teresa, I think you said yesterday about 2 ears, 1 mouth. I learned very quickly to ask questions and then listen. And a lot of the times they provided insight. I'd show them some data and they'd say, that's not right, look at it this way. And I'd learn things from them because they're the ones that did it day in and day out. I learned a few things in that process that, hey, you got to get people involved in it. They have to be involved in the process so that you know what's out there, so that you know what's available. You got to communicate. I used to say to a client, hey, you got to communicate 7 times to get it through to people. And he said, no, it's 12. And I think, Craig, you said yesterday 50, I think was the word you used. That concept of communication isn't just coming out of my mouth and saying things, though. As we go through and deploy technology projects, things change. It's setting expectations and then resetting expectations. It's setting expectations and resetting expectations. That's a process you have to go through. It's not just a once and done, hey, here's what we're going to go do. And the last piece we heard a little bit about as well, I think Maxime, you talked about this, is ownership. People have to feel like they have their fingers in it. Their fingerprints have to show up somewhere for them to really adopt true ownership. That doesn't mean everybody has to be involved or you have to take advantage of everything that's been provided, but you've got to go through the process of giving people the sense that they're being listened to and what they're saying they're actually being engaged in. So there's a spectrum here I like to look at. This is sort of my view of technology, if you will, over time. We started out many years ago trying to create visibility. How do we collect the data and put it into a form that we can do something, at least give it visibility so we can do something with it. Then we moved into, okay, how do we make it consistent? How do we standardize? How do we coordinate? And MES will do this. It tells people what to do next. It tells them how to do it, how to get it done. causes them to interact with the system and actually provide additional data. And then I think, Laurent, you were talking about it. This is where those outcomes in projects and project after project, hey, what are we going to do next and what's the process we iterate on? Hey, we can go drive improvement, make decisions. It's a relatively slow process depending on the organization. We're now moving into continuous improvement. The technology is now at a stage, as we're seeing, where it's actually able to drive us to do that more quickly. Take some of the decision making out of the process. What the fictitious plant that Mike was just talking about is a great example. Driving that cognitive process in the organization, if you will. So this progression has been natural over the last 40 years or so. We've seen it happen. And with it, you'll see in a minute, things have been changing. I know this is an old slide. I apologize to the BrainCube folks, but I think it speaks really well to what we've been talking about. You have MES, you have Historian, you have SCADA, you have LIMS, you have all these systems that are out there and available, maybe even some systems like you were asking about, Craig, that are not on this list that need to be integrated, that all feed to this little word you can read up here, production management system, the fourth system. I like that term, as you're going to see in a minute, because it aligns really closely to what we've been working on for the last 15, 16 years on the organizational change management side. All of these elements actually feed the potential for that system from a technical perspective. They also feed that system from a human perspective. Humans interact with each of these systems and provide great contextual data, dimensions to the data that the machines don't have. So getting folks to interact with these systems provide additional data to the production management system. And it's on at least two levels, probably more than that, but the two that I'll point out is, yes, it's operators on the floor, it's supervisors and leads that are interacting with the systems, but it's also the continuous improvement people, the process engineers, the leaders in the organization that are having to reinforce that. And their ways of doing that have to be shifted as well. Back to this slide for a minute, there's a hidden component to this. If you think about the demand for cognitive engagement, and we'll pause for a second. The implication here isn't that manufacturing people don't have cognitive capability or that we're questioning their ability. Smart people work on the manufacturing floor. Some of the folks I work with in Durable, one of the guys was a professor at the University of Georgia in Athens. That was his day job, and he worked nights at the plant. So it's not a matter of our people not being able to do it. But if you go back about 120 years or so, Frederick Taylor, what did he do? He did time and emotion studies. He took manufacturing processes that were typically done by guilds, broke it into its pieces to try to drive efficiency. Let's find a more efficient way of doing that. We've done that exceptionally well. Toyota Production Systems built on that. Lean, Six Sigma is all built on that and done a tremendous job. And in the process, we've taken the thinking out of it. We've taken the thinking out and said, hey, just go do this. Just go knock this out. So one of the elements we have to look at and understand organizationally is we've systematically removed the thinking process, and now we're moving to a point where technology supports thinking again. That concept of being able to make a decision, but then also allow that decision to be made down on the plant floor. Some of the times where we're putting MES systems in and we're looking at dashboards, we'll have plant managers saying, please don't show that dashboard to my boss. Not because he's trying to hide something, it's because I want to get my job done. I need to know it before he knows it. Organizationally, that's real. That's something we've got to be able to cover. Relatively busy slide, but this is the reason I like that concept of production management systems. We've been using this for many years, and it essentially describes how people interact individually across the organization, how they interact in a cadence, which I'll talk about in just a minute. This slide we'll come back to, but the point here is that 15 years ago or so, I had a client say to me, you know, really this is that which my boss is interested in, I am fascinated by. If my boss asks me a question, I'm probably going to pay attention to what he asks about. If he's not asking me a question, there's so many things going on. There's so much noise. What do I focus on? No matter how important that program was or how big that email was that came through 6 weeks ago that said, hey, this is important, if it doesn't get followed up on, it's probably not going to be taken care of. We'll come back to this. A little bit of reinforcement. We've heard a lot about this. This is a study from last year that Deloitte did. There's lots of investment being made. You're here because you either have or you're thinking about making additional investments in technology. There's a lot of that going on. And by the way, 3 of the major categories here all depend on human interaction. They all depend on human beings doing something to give context to data. So there's clearly a desire to go out there and make it happen. Mike talked about this a minute ago. Several people talked about it. Huge pressures from the external side on manufacturers. We've got to do more with less. There are labor shortages, there are power costs going up. There are all kinds of external pressures that are driving us to go improve, to go be more efficient. And from the inside the plant, when you look at optimizing inside the plant, you guys are folks that have lived there. Somebody back here was just talking about the operator on the floor. We all know what the pressure is. And yes, we can set up some phenomenal key performance indicators that are going to go drive outcomes, but every single one of those is driven by our frontline people's behaviors. At the end of the day, if they're not doing the things they need to do and we're not informing them, it isn't going to happen. So how do we get them to pay attention to this and then work our way up the ladder to be able to support that? I put all these up here only to acknowledge that and reinforce the fact that, yes, there's lots of reasons for digital transformation to be successful, and yet it's not. Research continues to show that we continue to spend a lot of money and deploy a whole lot of stuff, and yet we're not getting the value that was expected out of it. Projects are successful. We're really good at delivering IT projects. We're really good at putting the requirements together and hitting them on budget, hitting them on time, if you will. But getting the organization to adopt it and to do something with it is really where the barrier is. I put the one over here on the far right for a reason, because there's studies by a company called ProSci that show that if you actually do change management properly, you're 7 times more likely to actually see the beneficial results that you expect. It's not that we can't do it. It's not that organizations shouldn't or are not able to do it. As a matter of fact, within most organizations, I think Maxime was a great example. They've done it themselves. They didn't need a consultant to come in and do it with them. It's taken since 2017, which is great. Nothing wrong with that. Our challenge is, how do we figure out and work with our clients to shorten that time frame, to be able to see that value that much more quickly? And I would posit that when we approach these technology projects and opportunities, we're really mostly focusing on the tip of the iceberg. And I'm preaching to the choir, I know. You guys are the ones that focus on what are the integrations, and what is the infrastructure, or what are the security policies we have to put in place, what's the master data that we need. All the elements that drive that technology piece are usually the tip of the iceberg. It's the stuff that's below the waterline that usually sinks the ship, though. It's the things that involve the people and the process and the technology elements that are going on. We have a client that's actually in a go live right now. Today is their go live. We're in MES. There are 20 sites they want to deploy to. We started working with them in February of last year. Another organization is doing the technology side. We're doing the change management side. We started doing this process, working with them, doing the communications and stakeholder analysis and all that work. They were supposed to go live in August of last year. They ran into some pretty major issues, and they weren't as much about the technology itself. It was that, oh my word, we don't have the automation. We've got a deficit here that we don't have enough automation to give to the MES to get the results we're expecting. So they had to go through the process of adding the automation to getting the data. They also realized that their quality system wasn't lined up the way they expected. Their ERP, the master data in their ERP, it was not set up and structured so that the MES could consume it properly and then send the data back to it properly. They've spent the last 6 or 7 months sort of cleaning everything up that they didn't expect. We'd announced the project back in February. So we spent the last 6 months resetting expectations, working with them, going design reviews, going through build reviews. About 8 weeks ago, the senior leadership was really concerned. They're like, we think we probably should put a pause on this because I think we lost the confidence of our people. We're like, just hold off, just give it some time. We got through the testing process with them, and one of the outcomes was having involved the people at the plant through testing. They're going, man, this is really cool. I actually see, oh, you did this. This is the stuff that I asked for, which actually changed the perspective very quickly, and now plant leadership was really excited about what they saw and said, no, let's go ahead and go forward. So I'm hopeful that that's actually going to go forward in the next couple of weeks as well. I want to talk a little bit about these 3 things. Technology can change capability. All the stuff we've seen before is real. But capability doesn't necessarily change behavior. It's actually changing the routines. It's resetting the paradigm. I like that word that Mike put up there. It's resetting the paradigm for how we actually work as we're going forward. Nobody likes change. Everybody's familiar with this curve. Sarah, surprise, anger, resignation, finally acceptance. Everybody goes through it at a different rate. This is people. This is human beings. We all go through this process in one way or another, but we're all a little bit different. Knowing how to meet people where they are is one of the things you have to take into consideration from a change management perspective. And there's an organizational component to that I can talk about too. One of the big things about manufacturing though, you guys will remember this book maybe years ago, Jeffrey Moore, Crossing the Chasm, is that in manufacturing, who do we hire? We hire people that are really good at doing the same thing day in and day out reliably. For a reason, because that's what we want them to do. We want them to produce the same thing day in and day out. Are those the folks that are probably going to adapt to change pretty quickly? Are those the folks that are going to cross that chasm quickly? No, it's you. It's me. It's the ones that are in these rooms that are doing that. So if we can recognize that most of our folks are way over here on this right-hand side and learn to overcome what it takes to actually get there, that's the challenge, is actually recognizing we can shift them over. And the story that I just told you about the site that while it took so long to get there, hopefully that's the piece that's going to they'll be able to shift and see what's going on. I know this is a relatively simplistic view, but think of data. You know, we've got this concept of collecting all the data. There's plenty of data out there and that's available to us because we've invested and acquired the data. That's cost us something. We've made it accessible. We've given it some dimensionality. We put it in a form that actually can be consumed. And hopefully when you deploy a system, when this MES goes live, it's actionable. They can do something with it today that they didn't have before. That's the point of putting the project in place. The next step, though, is this concept of training. So let's go train the folks. Let's go train them how to do it. If I train you, are you going to use it? Maybe. Maybe not. There's a statistic out there from a training perspective that says no matter how good the hands-on training is, you're going to retain maybe 20% of it. Maybe 20% of it. The interesting thing about technology go-lives is when we go live, we flip a switch. I've yet to find the switch on a human being. We tend to train right up into the last second and then hope from shift to shift that when we turn that system on, it's going to run. It's true for like an MES, if you will, maybe not so much for a BrainCube deployment. But expecting people to flip that switch and make it happen is kind of like, let's train the 16-year-old in a video game on how to drive and then throw the keys to them, let them drive tomorrow. That's really what we expected people to do from a technology deployment perspective. So we got to go to the next level, because the reality is, if we do what we've done in the past, this is what occurs. You see that success, people are paying attention, the project team moves away, and then suddenly it starts to fritter away. You don't see the results you're expecting over the longer term. That's where you're questioning the organizational success, and that's why the data I was showing you earlier exists. So let's go to the next level. Let's look at what it takes to actually get some discipline in place. People don't like the word discipline, but it's real. And all discipline really means is we know what we need to do, we can do it consistently over time, and get the results that we expected. So this isn't just training, this is asking people to change the way they work, which is one more step in the process from a project perspective. It's thinking about how to apply this. Everything that Mike just presented in that fictitious company was changing the way people worked, from the CEO to the operator. The CEO can now see data and ask for things they couldn't ask for in the same way before. All the examples that he gave working down the organizational change changes the way people work, and we need to think about what that looks like going into it. Because if we don't, you're not going to see this. You'll see what I showed you before. One of the things that we use to try to get to something like this is sort of an old-time trick, if you will, is we engage folks in the organization that we call a PPIA. They're a pleasant pain in the ass. They're the folks that actually challenge the status quo. They're the ones that ask the hard questions, like a couple of folks were asking Mike up here a few minutes ago. The ones that are actually pushing for, hey, I've got some knowledge and experience and I'm really challenging what you're putting out there, not necessarily in a negative sense. About 15 years ago, we did a deployment at a client pilot site, trying to get things up and going. Everybody's all excited about it, except we identified a guy about 8 weeks before the deployment, curmudgeonly supervisor, been there for many, many years. It was a downtime system. He had his own little system they used on paper, and it was a really good sneaker net. He did a great job of collecting and working with his people and understanding what he needed to do day in and day out. And he wanted nothing to do with the new system we were going to deploy for them. So we started working with him and just saying, hey, let's just show you what's going on. Let's prove this to you. It took about 6 weeks to prove to him that our data was as good or better than his data, and that it was a richer data set. But he's the guy that actually got his operators to go in and not only categorize the downtimes and put comments in, but put their initials next to them. That management system we put in 15 years ago is still the core to their management system today. They've changed their technologies, but the core processes, the management system, the structure they're using, is the same thing today that they had back then, because they integrated into the way they did business. I'm not going to belabor this, but this is a framework that we use. We don't ask our clients to learn this. We don't tell people you got to adopt it. But we use this as a framework really just to acknowledge and identify that I can put anybody's role into this structure. In manufacturing, you're trying to get sustained results. To get sustained results, you have to execute the standards. To execute the standards, you have to be trained, and then the standards have to exist. Well, when we kick off the day, we better have some goals and metrics, and better have an action plan. And everything runs perfectly from left to right, and we get the sustained results we expect every day. Not so much. You need a corrective action loop. You need a means to be able to address the issues when things don't go right, whether they're intentional or not. And slowly, after you sort of lower the water in the swamp, as people used to say, you can start doing some of the preventive action components, maybe get ahead of the game. We know a material change is coming. Let's modify those standards. This all feels very tangible, but this same loop applies to technology in exactly the same way. It really just depends on how you apply it to each role in the organization. So as a framework, it's just what elements apply and where do we apply them and what do those standards look like? Somebody asked a question the other day about, hey, can we get BrainCube to build some of the content from a standards perspective? Certainly we can do that. That's where the technology is going. How do we make it available to them and how do we get people to use it? The second dimension to those roles, though, is that depending on where you are in the organization, you have a different focus. Hopefully operators are focusing on the routines. Hopefully they're producing the product day in and day out. We want their input. We want them involved in the quality circles and teams and so forth. But hopefully they're focusing on the day in and the day out and getting that product out the door. As you move into the production manager's role or the CI role or the process engineer role or the leadership role, you're thinking more about improvements. That's where we are. That's what we're all about. It's what are we going to do to go drive improvement for the organization so that teeter-totter slips the other way, if you will. When you put these together, those roles are all integrated throughout the organization. And this is sort of mom and apple pie, everybody sort of gets this. But what we don't think about when we look at an organizational chart is the interactions that are actually required, the way they should be interacting. And go back to that which my boss is interested in, I'm fascinated by. We tend not to think about how that interaction has to occur. And it goes one step further when we think of this, we call it a cadence. Somebody said something yesterday afternoon about that morning meeting and those morning meetings about, oh, I got to talk about all the problems we had last night. It's a litany of all the issues. This process really ought to be about what did we do about it? What did we learn from it? What do we do going forward to make sure we don't have it happen? Every manufacturing plant, every manufacturing organization I've been into has something like this. They call it different things. They do it at different rates. There are different people involved, but everyone has this. The ones that I've walked into that don't have these in some formal fashion, if you will, or even informal and consistent, are the ones that struggle no matter what. They're also the ones we tend to say, you're not ready for technology. We need to get something in place to be able to support you because you're not even going to read the reports that we put out for you. You're not even going to read the content that's going to be available to you. But this conceptually is really where the benefit comes in because this is where the human interaction occurs and you see things being actually utilized. So integrating that into this overall process is really what the end game is about. It's about putting this operating system in place for manufacturing, of which technology is a major component and a growing component in different ways. Sort of like a puzzle. I was at a dairy manufacturer last week, and they were talking about, they put a downtime system in a couple of months ago, if you will. They're also a company that had invested in putting in their own operating system. They called it the company name operating system, and they had daily direction setting meetings, and they had the tier meetings in place, and they actually used them, and they were telling a story about how one day they were one of the plant managers in one of the meetings, and the supervisor said, hey, we got a comment on one of the downtime issues that said, I like steak and eggs. Okay, that's kind of strange. Supervisor said to the plant manager, hey, can you go talk to the guy and just have a conversation? Plant manager goes out and says, hey, how do you like your steak cooked? I kid you not, that's exactly what he said that happened. How quickly do you think word got around that, hey, they're paying attention to this stuff? He didn't berate him, he didn't challenge him, he didn't put him down. It just sent the message that, hey, we're looking at this stuff. This is what's important to us. This is the stuff that really matters to us as we're going forward. And I guarantee you that sneaker net inside the organization was a whole lot faster than them sending an edict out that said, hey, you need to put your comments on the downtime system. So I come back to this for a reason, because this progression here, and as we get over to this far side, requires this concept of higher cognitive engagement. But it also requires some critical thinking about what you're going to do with it and how it's going to change the organization itself. When we look at the primary causes, the primary challenges, when you break down why we're not able to get digital transformation, these are the buckets they generally fall into, the stuff that we focus on. And when we start working on these elements, historically for us, the front end is important and we need to get them in place, but a lot of time and effort is spent over here on the communication and the enablement side. It's about getting people to understand how they change their ways. Part of what we're finding though is that we're refocusing a little bit on the changing the way the organization thinks, breaking down that concept of systematically how have we organized ourselves to think about deploying these things and actually make use of it. So that when we bring in this now new prescriptive element that I was talking about on the data slide a minute ago, These components over here aren't just the operators and the supervisors, they're also the continuous improvement folks, also the site leadership. We've seen this in multiple presentations. This BrainCube in particular, when you move into these spaces, gets to the point where everybody has to change the way they think and act, if you will. And Craig, I loved your question of Mike there at the end. One of the questions, if I go back to the MES deployment that I was telling you about and the pause that we had is, what is the data that's required to put into the system to provide sufficient context to really make that happen, really push that along? It's not going to happen overnight. So how do we progressively implement those elements and recognize what the next steps are? A lot of words on this slide, just acknowledging that there's been a lot of thought over the years and we put into understanding how to do this, the steps that you go through. The ones that I highlight for this group in particular that are really important is really thinking about not only is changing the way that people work, but what does it mean in the context of a prescriptive environment versus, hey, I want to change your actual process. If I go back a few years, a lot of what was easy about doing deployments many years ago was we were actually physically changing processes. We were physically modifying how things were doing things. We're putting automation in and changing what they did. It was tangible. In most cases today, it's intangible. It's data, it's reports, it's information that we're transacting with. And unless we can change people's mindset about, hey, this is a change to how I do work based on the information that's available to me, unless we do that, we're not going to get to stick. They're not going to be willing to understand that. It does require some additional competency, and that concept of reinforcement and adoption does not go away. It does not go away throughout the organization. So if I have to leave you guys with a couple of takeaways, we're really asking people to think differently. Somebody mentioned the word cultural change yesterday at one point. That's exactly what it is. We're driving a cultural change by virtue of the type of data, the type of information that's being prescribed for folks to be able to do stuff. Got to look at the routines. We're changing people's routines. What's the difference it's going to make to support them? And the management systems really are what's going to sustain it as you're going forward. Been in many presentations. It isn't that technology is not valuable. It is valuable, but it's not the technology that produces the outcomes. In projects, we install the software and put it in place. The management system is actually what installs the habits. So I'll close it out with this, put these questions up here. It's really that digital transformation is not a project. It's not just a technology project, if you will. It's actually a leadership challenge. It's a leadership challenge that we have to take on. And the next, I was going to say decade, but somebody said 5 years earlier. I think maybe 3 years. It's happening very, very quickly, much, much more quickly today. And it isn't going to be about the organization that can collect the most data. Yes, getting the data in to be used is important, but it's not about collecting the most data. It's going to be determined by who changes their behaviors the fastest. It isn't about whether a BrainCube works. It's about who's going to act on it. Thank you.
Scott, any questions for Scott?
I knew it was going to happen. I knew it was going to happen.
It's coming. Go ahead.
She's coming. She's coming. Just leave it with him.
Yeah, exactly. You hold on to that, Craig.
I did not want to be that guy. So Scott, gosh, I've been working with InSource. We're like 10-year anniversary next year.
Yeah.
So I have 2 questions for you.
Mm-hmm.
In that time or longer, where you started with this and where you are today, is there somewhere that you've had to pivot on as you've changed how you do this, or reemphasize? So what's changed in the last 10 years on how you're doing this? That's one. Second question, with all your exposure, do you have an example of a leader who was able to get past the high failure rate, make real sustainable change, one that's not personality driven because he's leading it, but something that was actually sustainable?
So what we've changed, we're actually in the process of changing right now, partly because of BrainCube. So a lot of the deployments of things like an MES are much more process related. This is more thinking related. And so we're literally in the middle of how do we shift that focus to different parts of the organization. It is the operators, but it's not just the operators. So how do we move that up the chain and get the continuous improvement folks and the process engineers more involved and engaged in actively using the system such that more content is available, such that that new data is available. We're in the process of doing that right now. We don't have all the answers. But that's part of what we're working through in the implementations we're doing right now. The second question is even harder. It's hard because you guys, unlike you, don't stay in the same place that often. People tend to move into different roles, into different organizations. The one that I referred to a few minutes ago of having started with many years ago, the fact that the management systems that are in place, they're still using those systems, they've changed some of the technology, is more of what I would point to where there's value. And I'd actually point to what you guys have done. You have management systems and structures that are in place. When you or Mike go away, I'm hopeful that they will be sustained. So I don't have a good answer for those strong personalities are the ones that really can go make the change. Honestly, I'm really more interested in getting the organizational structure to change than depending on the personality.
Let me grab the mic for you.
All right, Scott, so certainly great presentation because I can relate to a lot of what you talked about. If you don't mind just going back one slide.
Yeah.
I think for me, I just have a question for you because you hit the point home where we say we do a very good job of doing training, but then I think where we lack, or at least where I see the struggle is changing the ways of working and the routines. So I guess my question for you, and I'll start use your quote because I love the quote, that which my boss is treated tonight. I find it fascinating. I'll start using that. But for me, you know, the routines and the ways of working, I think, is really where the value add is. So I guess what have you seen in terms of the best way in terms of how organizations need to execute that?
So the only way that we found to do it and do it effectively is you need to have someone who's sort of the coach who comes in alongside as that deployment's occurring that actually highlights and says, hey, this is the way you did it before, here's what you're doing again. And then on the other side of that is put the reinforcement in place that says, from a leadership perspective, put your spreadsheets away and start using the system. I don't want you to rely on that system going forward. Totally honest, the most expensive part of our consulting engagement is exactly that part because we're on the floor, engaged with the folks in their environment. That's how you change their routines. Someone's got to focus on working with them and be there to be willing to reinforce and support them. And a lot of times it can't be the supervisor, it can't be the manager because they're going through the change process at the same time and they have a full-time job, probably working 60 hours a week already and are still learning the system as they're doing it. So the example I gave a few minutes ago, the pilot site, I've got 3 people on site for the next 4 weeks to do nothing but be on the floor in the manufacturing environment, literally available and working with folks, walking up and saying, hey, did you get that thing coded properly? Hey, did you do this differently? Hey, why are you still using your spreadsheet today? So that over time, they actually will shift their behaviors and reinforce that new way of working, if you will. Sometimes it can be very subtle, sometimes it's very, very tangible.
Any other questions? All right, thank you very much, Scott. It's great.
Thank you all.